But my third thing was JonBenet was found. This house, when you look at it on the documentary, it was so much curves and nooks and crannies, and this room was behind this room, and the layout of the house was really bizarre.
Three Things, a Murder Police podcast production.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I'm Wendy.
And I'm David.
Well, David, you've come up with a new idea on us here. You know, I was sitting there a couple of months ago watching the JonBenét Ramsey kind of documentary, recapping that cold case file. And, you know, that was a couple of months ago. A lot goes through this brain in the course of a couple of months. And you sprang it on me that you wanted to talk about what three things stood out. And I'm going to admit I had to go back and not rewatch, although I should have, but I really had to do some digging to give you three things.
Well, what I want to try to do is we keep getting contacted by people on some of these cases that are big, and anything from that one to the things in Bardstown, Kentucky, which is a very sensational case in and of itself, and they're contemporary cases and they're in the moment. And I'm a big believer that I don't want to cover something that somebody else has covered so well already. Right. JonBenét Ramsey, Through the Roof, by some amazing documentaries and podcasts. And I use Bardstown because of those 5 murders there, and the fact that Jessica Noe and Shay McAllister, for example, produced that series called Bardstown that I don't think anybody could hold a candle to. That said, I was thinking, how could you and me start to engage more contemporary things? We're a little late on the JonBenét Ramsey documentary, and that's what we're going to talk about. But how can we engage those things a little bit and maybe share our opinions with the audience and see what they think too, is to see if we're vibing on the same thing. So what I came up with is from time to time we're going to take a contemporary issue and break it down with the goal of synthesizing something we've seen or watched, and for you and me individually, what are 3 things that stand out? And so that's why I took on the JonBenét Ramsey thing. What we're going to talk about is the 2024 documentary on Netflix called Cold Case JonBenét Ramsey, which was an updated piece that really brought things forward. And I know I learned a lot. I watched it with you, and a couple of weeks ago I downloaded it, and I was flying, and I watched it again and made some notes. And
that's how you came up with your 3 things quicker than I did.
I think so.
You had a refresher.
Yeah, I did my homework that we were both supposed to do. So
I did homework, thank you.
Yeah, over dinner 20 minutes ago. So.
But I did it.
Yeah, exactly.
I did it.
So what I'd like to do is go through and each of us give our 3 things. And how do you want to do it? Do you want to give 3 things in a row, or do you want to do a 1 and me do a 1, or a 2 and a 2? I mean,
I think we can back and forth because you know I'm going to have an interjection on yours or even a comment.
Good. And again, for the watchers and the listeners, let us know on anything you're watching or listening on what you think. My big thing is that I learned a lot from the documentary, and it changed my mind about a few things. And we're not going to get into guilt or innocence. I'm so big about that right now, but I know that there were 3 things that just struck me, and they might surprise people. And there's 3 things that struck you. So you go first. What's number 1 on your list of 3?
I knew you were going to do this to me. Well, what stood out? I've got several things that really just both kind of grind my gears, if you will. I think the first that has always stood out since this came out was the odd amount of the ransom of $118,000. You know, I'm very particular about things. I don't like odd things. All I could think is, why wasn't it 120 or 115?
Good.
But why 118? And that ransom within itself, you know, there was a lot with that, and that's one of my second things. But my first big thing was that amount.
Right. And that came up in the 2024 documentary.
It's
come
did.
up over years and years. And I think virtually everybody that ever looked at this, saw or heard about it, that rang a bell too. If you remember the initial interviews with the FBI that went and everything, they said the same thing. It was just a skewy, weird number. And
It was, and part of my second thing ties in with that, and I guess I should tell you what that is so it can fulfill the whole thing. It was an odd amount, and that ransom note was really long, like unusually long, almost 2 or 3 pages, I believe. But it was written on paper that belonged in the household. It was, had been started and redone, and there was talks of the imprints on other pages, and it just was very odd that pad of paper belonged in the home and had things on it that the mom had written. So, was it a coincidence that somebody broke in and wrote a ransom note while the whole family's sleeping? And it's this odd amount that, strangely enough, matched up with the dad's bonus amount for that year for his job, his Christmas bonus, I think it was. So it was the whole amount of the bonus. It was that it matched his bonus. I'm sorry, the amount of the
ransom note.
So what I found odd was the two things combined, the amount of the ransom and also the ransom itself was written on a pad of paper and with a pen that belonged in the home, and the note in a practice draft was found there. Absolutely. I didn't know that, and that seemed so odd to me.
There's another benefit of the documentary, because I think most people knew that just watching. And I'll talk. One of my things is going to be what we know and don't know anyway, which is a little spooky. But there's the value of a documentary again, where it's been packed into 3 quick episodes that you can digest. Mm-hmm. Is that there you go? As you find something else out that you weren't aware of, and
right.
And that resonated with you enough to make that your number 1 and 2. So you jumped ahead. So
yeah,
there you go.
I'm good at
You're
that.
very competitive, of course.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think that I share with that now. What's that mean? What if you looked at the documentary and you caught that? Just in a brief summary, what does that mean to you about the possibility of what happened?
Well, what it meant to me was I was just so surprised that this note had a practice draft and that it was written on a pad of paper that belonged in the home. I think that struck me as odd because who's going to sit in the home and write a ransom note while the family's there?
Right.
Like, aren't you afraid they're going to come down and see you?
Right.
So then it made me think, was it someone in the home? Wasn't it someone in the home? Had they been... how did somebody get a hold of their pad,
there we go.
pad of paper? I
think that's what's confused everybody. And I think that's one of the many things that when you look at logically circles you back into the home, into the
yes.
central nature of the home and everything. So I agree with you. I think that struck everybody, and everybody's wrestled with that for years, is that bizarreness about the pad of the paper, the writing on it previously, the one that looks like a start with Mr. and Mrs. and then
yes.
it goes on. Good stuff if that's what you picked up. Well, let's do this since you went 1 and 2. Go and lay your number 3.
All right. Number 3, I had learned this. I knew that JonBenet was found in the home, but maybe I just hadn't followed it as closely as I did when this happened in 96. Maybe I just wasn't a crime buff back then.
Well, but think too, can I say this? And I think the listeners would agree too, is that it's like 3 decades old.
Right.
And the persistence and stuff, information spilling out slowly. And I'm going to talk in a minute about how it came out and how it was handled. No, that's true. I think that I had assumptions from it the year it happened.
Oh, yeah. I definitely had assumptions. But my third thing was JonBenet was found. This house, when you look at it on the documentary, it was so much curves and nooks and crannies, and this room was behind this room, and the layout of the house was really bizarre.
That was a powerful thing in the documentary that I noticed.
Yes.
Is the 3D animation.
Yeah, it's like there's rooms hidden
seen.
behind rooms. And
almost like the Winchester house where
yes.
that woman kept building staircases.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought
so
about.
I was thinking, I knew she was found in the home. I was just thinking a standard in the basement of a home,
Right.
kind of like we have. Okay, it's in the basement. But then you find out there's this upper level and it branches off in a middle level. Anyways, she was found down in this little room in the basement. And what I didn't know was apparently the staircase that went down to it was kind of not a typical staircase. And all I could think was, who's navigating down a staircase carrying a child who's probably not conscious at that point? That's just a lot of ins and outs and through this room and around that room. And I know she was only 6 and so she wasn't big, but that's still seemingly cumbersome to carry a weight of a child who's not conscious, or maybe she was already dead at that point. I don't know. But the other thing that struck me odd was apparently this room, it was cracked open a little, the window, to allow for the Christmas lights, because, she was found on Christmas Day. So this room, the train room, they called it. Right. I guess it was a little playroom for the children, or for Burke, the brother. That room apparently had like a wooden latch kind of system on it. And I didn't know that until this documentary. And I found it, and I know this is kind of diving into the crime part, and I know you don't really want to do that, but I found it odd that just because that was latched, nobody went into it. And then when everyone was done searching, the dad just goes down and does the latch, and there she is.
Yep.
And I thought, I know that sometimes law enforcement, they're human like the rest of us. They tend to overlook things. It can happen. But if you see a room with this wooden latch system, why would you not raise it up?
Well, and we've talked about it, and I agree. And I think that for sure that there was a ball dropped right there.
Yeah.
Is that the house wasn't searched thoroughly, and maybe because of some assumptions they made, but I don't think that's really. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that's defendable.
Yeah.
Is that it wasn't searched thoroughly.
No, it definitely wasn't.
And if some, for whatever reason, is not going into the next door, and I shared with you, and I'll share with everybody too, that when I was working, if we had, for example, a call of a missing child, I think I told you on the phone that in a leadership or supervision issue, as I was really big about talking to the supervisors that responded to the scene, and I always said that wherever the kid went missing from needed 2 to 3 independent, close searches of the home. What I meant is that is if an officer or two goes through the house and they look, is we expected another officer or another pair of officers different than them to go through with a completely different set of eyes and looking and digging, and to assume based on what the size of the kid is, where could the kid be tucked away. And 3 times would be the magic on that, because I remember so many times where on that second search is a kid would be found asleep behind a couch or a sofa, just curled up in a ball and asleep. And the importance of that is that if we don't know that, what follows next is a pretty damn big deal. And that's when the fire department's called here locally. The fire department would be called, and we go into we hand the scene over to them, and we go into a big search mode, which we're willing to do. But back to that again, that's why we hit everything 2 and 3 times.
Yes.
And that probably should have been done there.
Yeah, and I understand there were several people in that home, but then at that point, the whole scene's been compromised because it's been
potentially compromised. Yes. I know that word is used, but potentially it has been. Yeah.
Well, and I think when it was over, then John, the dad, goes back down. All I could think is, was he just searching again and thought, oh, this door's still locked, let me go look. But it's like he went down and went right to the room.
Well, that's one of the inferences that people make that is kind of disturbing.
And right where she was covered up. I just thought it was, but above all that, what struck me odd is, how are you getting this child down this cookie cutter botched up home and nobody hears?
I think that, again, that was a powerful thing in that documentary, that when you watch the 3D animation of moving through that home, you feel the complexity.
Yeah, it was just almost very confusing to navigate through that. But yeah, that was my third thing, was how did no one hear her being carried down those stairs?
Yeah. There's so much to all of this. And again, I think just watching the documentary helps people. If you, I was the same way for 30 years, bits and pieces here, bits and pieces.
Yeah, because it wasn't, I don't think it was as pronounced back then as like crime and details are now. I think they dove into it a lot, or maybe I just wasn't in tune to it back then. I would catch pieces of it
one of the things
on the tabloids.
And that's where I want to go with one of the problems with the case now is, but should we have known that? So, so that's your 3.
Yes.
Is the amount on the note.
I really have secretly a 4th. I'm extra, you know.
Yeah.
It was the paintbrush.
Right.
It was the paintbrush that it was seemingly 3 parts of it had been broken, and one of it was used as a garrote around her neck, and then the other one was still in the paint container, if you will.
A little toolbox or craft box.
Like a little craft box. That who broke it? And we found 2 pieces. The 3rd piece was never found. And I didn't even realize a paintbrush is what was used. And not to infer her deceased mother, but it was the mom's toolbox of paint brushes. And that was you. I just found it odd that the paintbrush was broken in half and used.
Yeah. Because, a lot of times I think people that do these kind of things bring their own tools.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
So why are you writing your note from their paper, and why are you using a paintbrush, and why did you break it into 3 pieces?
Yep.
That was so odd to me.
Yeah, there's so many... That's one of the countless things in this thing that's odd, so...
Okay, let's have yours.
Yeah, because I'm going to stick with 3.
All right.
The first one that I noticed, and again, based on the documentary, after 30 years... Like I said, I'd come up with some opinions before. This one's difficult, but it's not difficult, is my real disappointment in some of the members of the police department in Boulder. And I refuse to use that washing everybody thing, because it's just not true. I've had the opportunity to work with Boulder people and close to Boulder, and it's like anybody else, it's made up of fantastic people. But back then, I think some of it was just a couple people from what the documentary revealed is how they dumped. Here we are. How they released information about the case and details about the case prematurely. We always talk, and I counsel families now that we meet about why these things have to be held close to the chest. And here you had a couple people with that police department that were intentionally pumping a narrative out to a willing media, maybe complicit. I think you had 2 things going on in the media. You had the tabloid thing that was going to eat up anything they could sensationalize. That's not even really journalism. But you also had, in the documentary, they interviewed some decent journalists that were simply relying on sources like they do, and they were being manipulated. And you look at the idea that those initial couple of investigators developed strong opinions and didn't come off of them. And you've heard so many detectives that we sat down with. Rule 1 is you don't do that. And what blew my mind is that I think over the years I had made loose opinions based on what happened on that BS. And to know that people in a police department created a kind of an ad campaign to prop their theory up and dumping it out on the media, it's unethical. And the other thing, too, is that it can harm the hell out of a case. Right. Because most of what was released, we should know about sitting here today. So it was a sensationalism. It was an exploitation of a young lady that was there. And I'll leave my number 1 with this, that's what we always talk about, why you have to fight to stay objective. You have to stay in inquiry mode. You have to check your biases. You have to understand, how do we say it? I think me and Schoonover say it over and over again, that you have to make your theories fit your facts and not your facts fit your theories. And that was a thing. So the disinformation that was leaked, maybe is a word for it, super disappointing, unethical behavior, and probably crashed on the case a little bit. That follows into my number 2, is specifically 2 of the investigators that they talk about in the documentary. Just the ineptness. And I'm going to say that. I'll be the first one to call out. We all make mistakes. We can miss things looking through a house, But there's certain things that in law enforcement or investigations that you can walk right past, and it's inept and stupid. And one of the things I got was the female detective doing a major network interview and making remarks about how I looked into the eyes of a killer and I knew this and I knew that and I didn't know if I was going to have to shoot him and stuff, talking about John Ramsey. And the whole thing is, it's, to me, I watched it and it was delusional because they had not made a case yet.
Right.
And here they are on a major network. Here she is on a major network, almost like she just left the field go. And you're nowhere near that. The unfairness that is to the family, because everybody's innocent until they're proven guilty. And I'm going to keep coming back to this. We don't name people or talk about those details on the cases. We meet families all the time where there's strong inferences as to what happened, but it's not going to happen here because that's not how you do it. And that was super disappointing. It was what we would call cringeworthy to watch that interview. And then the lead detective that we find out now, maybe this was over the last 30 years, and again, I missed it, had no death investigation experience, and he was pushed up on it. And at that time, Boulder was blessed as a community not to have a lot of that going on. What a good thing, right, for the community. But that also means that you don't have seasoned people or experienced people. And even him, again, the ridiculousness of writing a book, indicting John Ramsey or the family. And he later got sued, and there was an undisclosed amount of money. Good. That's what that should have been. But it's like, for me, when I look at things like that, that's the law enforcement behavior that scars the entire industry, and we just don't need any of it. I remember watching some of the video from his civil suit deposition, and he kept hammering back to the idea that was my hypothesis. And I kept thinking, well, good, as Ray would say, okay, buckaroo. Ray would say buckaroo, but I'd say, good, you've got a hypothesis. Nobody needs to know about it except the people you're investigating. And the one thing about your hypothesis is you have to accept the fact and really try to prove your own hypothesis wrong is how you do this. But he marches it out there like that's his defense. Well, that's what I thought. Great. I know that me and the people I work with and the murder cops I meet when I travel is we've all thought things in a case and been wrong.
Yes.
The difference is we didn't act on it because we waited to find out, and we sure didn't go out in the public eye and talk about that with anybody.
And write a book.
Yeah, and write a book. Like celebrating a win they never had. That's related to number one, but it just bothered me, and it's that thing that brings justifiable criticism to the industry, right? Number three kind of ties those together a little bit about where I think my heart's broke a little bit about the case. Over the years between the intentional releases, then the battle between the DA and the police department, the fact they brought the retired detective in, he's since passed, that became an advocate, not for the Ramseys, but he was really cool because he was an advocate for the truth. Because of these pieces of the case coming out that should have never come out, that case for that little girl is going to remain extremely difficult to deal with. And even if they do make an arrest one day, the battle for the prosecutors in court is going to be incredible. And that's because all those details are out there, and they taint everything. And if I was a defense attorney, I'm going to rack those up and I'm going to go after it, and it's been earned. The information we all know, the information we saw, most of that, we really, in all candor, we shouldn't know. We actually shouldn't have known as much as we know about the note. We shouldn't know about the paintbrush. We shouldn't know about the pineapple bow. We shouldn't know all of that actually. And I know people listening thinking, well, that's crazy, we should know. And I'm like, no, the objective here is the truth and justice, and that belongs inside of a sealed system.
Well, and also, with in cases in general, when you give out all those details, if something were to happen and they find the killer, or in the case of the John Mark Carr, I think his name was.
That's it.
He was using some of that to his benefit and he didn't even kill her, but he had gathered all this and made it fit that he had murdered her.
Conventional false confessor. And, me and the people I worked with, we watched that more than once, is that somebody would come in And people would argue, why in the world would you do that? There's a ton of reasons you would do that. But that's where I was going to finish with is the proof in the pudding here is John Mark Carr. Is that because of him simply catching the news and the things coming out over like a 4-year email and phone conversation with a smart professor in Colorado. I'm watching the interview. The guy's as straight as an arrow to me, and he's intelligent. But it armed John Mark Carr with enough to make this very believable.
Yes.
And the thing is again, it takes everybody for that ride. It takes the family for that ride. And in the end, it's on him.
Well, and also, you know, like we've watched and read it many times before, and I'm sure you experienced, if you release details, and some of those you may want to hold for the real killer because he may say something about a paintbrush and
that you don't
why would
want
you give
to
out
hold
those
it.
little
Right. You have to hold it. And and again,
and they told everything.
That exactly. And I know that frustrates people because we all want to know. But the goal here is, I got to keep saying it, the truth and the justice from the truth. And everybody that comes into the system, that's what they're looking for. So the false confession of that guy and the exploitation of that, again, that little girl's death, and that's what that is. It's a sick exploitation of that, is another reason why investigators don't share, and they don't share publicly. And this is awful sometimes to families, but they don't share to the families all the time. And I saw false confessions. I saw somebody in the business get fired almost right in front of me one time. I'm not going to go into detail on that because they shared information that made it back to a victim's family that was actually pretty disgusting, that didn't need to be known at the time. And back to your point, it was such intimate detail. They're really close to I'm just going to use the strangulation mechanism that was used. It was like that when that went out, is the immediately shock that we had was this could really be a problem just because it went airborne. So again, that's my 3. I think it for me again, I am recommending the documentary. I think
it was a good, well-made documentary.
I got the impression that the producers, and I may be wrong on this, were trying to right some wrongs. It was almost like maybe a media mea culpa in a good way of saying, hey, let's look back at this thing and see where the problems were. And they identified that good. For me, it helped me because again, I'm like you. I have a hard time leaving the central location of that house for where the answer might be. But that's kind of where it's at. But at the same time, it was a good reminder to stay objective, that there are some alternative theories out there. They looked at a handful of other people and DNA eliminated them. And that's the last thing I'll leave. I'll throw kind of a halfway number 4, and we'll close on this because I think people are thinking about it when I said the word DNA. Is John Ramsey has asked for testing of the samples they have left, and I guess the trick bag on that is yes, it'd be great to have them tested with modern methods, but you'd have to really look at how big your sample is and what the risk is. And in this day and age where DNA in 30 years has gone at a light speed record of change, you have to think, what will it be in 5 years? And so I guess the question now is, if you have a limited sample,
do you compromise it?
Yeah, well, you destroy it once you're done. So do you make an attempt now, or are we truly in the long game? And do you see science on the wings that would take it even further? Because I really believe that a good DNA thing would go into genetics and familial DNA, and that would start to whittle things down quickly. But if the DNA is truly related to a perpetrator, that's a whole other ball of wax that comes up with. So, well, good deal. I think hopefully people listening and watching, maybe we stirred your imagination. And again, you can comment on YouTube or any of our social media things, and Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you find us, and let us know what you think. But if you like it, we may do this. I think we need to stay on top of some contemporary things like this, and generate some more conversation about the case.
I agree.
Well, I'll say good evening, but we are married and live together, so we'll say that several more times tonight. And goodbye to our audience.
Thanks as always for watching Murder Police Podcast.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.